Welcome everybody to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. Say it enough times over 7 years, you can say it fast. Today is I wasn't prepared for this portion. Today is the fall-winter 2023-2024 class. And I believe this is our 7th office hour. So we only have after this 3 more left. So just as a reminder to everybody that all of your assignments are due on March 11th at 9 a.m. So that's a nice reminder for everybody because there is no extension after that. If you submit your final assignment at that time, you will of course get feedback. And if you need to resubmit, then you'll have time for that. But there is no resubmission and there is no late submissions after that for any other assignments. And the reason for that is because we run concurrent courses, and then we have a new course that starts right away. So just to keep everybody aware. We do have a lot of questions, but I do want to check in. How's the course going for everybody? How are you feeling about the experience? Are you over your head, in over your head? Do you feel like it's way too much work? Or what's going on? You can either unmute or you can throw in the chat.
Going well. I don't think I have too much to update. I've been busy with work, so I feel like I've been slacking on this front. So I'm more just here to like take it in today, I think. So thank you for that.
Perfect. Well, thanks for coming. And good to see you. Anybody else?
Yeah.
How are you doing with the class?
I'd say for me, it's been a lot of work, honestly. But it's been the good work because I just like jumped head into gardening about 3 years ago, and everything that I've learned has just been like spot knowledge. Like, oh, I bought these seeds. How do I even plant these seeds? And I look something up on TikTok, or you know what I mean? Everything has been just like learning this really discrete thing that I need for the moment. This has helped kind of like structure this knowledge in a way that I can digest it and expand on it. And then I'm going to have like a body of work that I can lean back on. I find like overall, that's what's been the most useful for me. It's kind of like have a structure, a rhythm. What we do one week builds on the past week. I just feel like I'm becoming like a proper like gardener now, not just somebody who just like figures things out on the go. Yeah.
There is that moment when you finally feel that you've stopped killing more plants than are growing.
Yeah.
And there is a structure. I years ago moved to the biodynamic system of planting for the only reason that it told me when to plant. That was it. And the fact that I had never seen a bad biodynamic farm. So now my seed collection was roots, leaves, fruits, and then I just followed the calendar. I just planted when it told me to. And generally, when I did side-by-side comparisons where I would plant like a root crop the week before, during the week I should, and the week later, the one that was the week it was supposed to be was always better. So there's a little bit of side-by-side comparison, but I can't say I did it because I believe in Rudolf Steiner, nor that I believe that cosmic rays influence horse manure and then create dynamics that I don't understand. I can't say that because I don't have that belief system, but I love that it's a system that I can just follow and forget about. So sometimes it's just having a system that works really well that you can just apply and not have to think about is the value.
I feel like for me, it's the opposite because like I come from a background in ecology and environmental studies and sciences, so it's very broad. And then finally, like, especially the soil week, it was like, okay, things are like finally feeling like smaller and like, what can I actually do? Because like I have a pretty like good understanding of like plant interactions and succession, and like I wanted the more meatier, like hands-on things to do. And like that's I wish it wasn't the middle of winter so I could just like go out and do it, but I'm super excited to like start planting things and like dig up my lawn. And yeah, I'm like super excited to actually do hands-on stuff. So it's been super great for that. Because I can keep a house plant alive, and that's been the extent of my growing. So getting in the ground has been like my exciting thing.
Amazing. Amazing. It just goes to show we all come from a different background, especially if we've been through formal education. A lot of that siloed formal education, be it ecology or environmental sciences or studies, is quite broad, even though it is, siloed and specific. And so much of higher education doesn't focus on technique or strategy, like the actual doing the thing. And right now I'm taking, I'm tiptoeing into a master's degree, which is an interdisciplinary studies between 3 fields that help me to justify doing this, because every day is a struggle every day. So I hear you, because it's so funny to be in formal education again and to hear, well, why are you being so specific? Because I want this to have some value at the end of it. So, I'm lucky to be able to do a project. So I'm developing an advanced design course for my master's as opposed to a thesis. But at the same time, I still have to read ridiculous articles and write ridiculous papers, which I will never think of again. Jane, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I just have learned a lot, so I've really enjoyed the course so far, and it's flying by. Can't believe we only have a few units left. So yeah, I'm just really grateful, I think, for the information, and yeah, to Sydney's point, I'm excited to, like, once it warms up a little bit, to try to start putting some things into practice. So it's going well so far, and yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for checking in. I appreciate that. And then Sydney, if you're keen, if you want to plant something, right now is onion seed planting in your biome. So if you wanted to start onion seeds, now would be the time. And they're super fun because they grow from these little rock, black triangular seeds into small bulbs, and then you transplant the bulbs and all the rest of it. But it's easy, very easy to grow your entire year's crop of onions by seed by starting now. So there is a desire. You can do that, or you can be dumb like me, which is I would normally start my tomato seeds now. And what I would do is, as I was growing them out, I would basically bury them deeper and deeper and deeper in bigger pots. So that way, when they were ready to go out, because they'll root from all portions of their plant body, they had this massive root ball. And so I'd have like just a couple of leaves at the top, but the whole 1 or 5 gallon pot, depending on how obsessed I was, would be ready to go. And then they took off. It's incredible how quickly. There's also some great Ukrainian seed varieties where you actually dig them up in the fall, plant them, cut them down, and then they grow throughout the winter in the house. And then you plant them out as a fully formed tomato. And so in Canada, I would have tomatoes sometimes in April, which is a little insane. So talking a little bit about season extension as well, from Kevin's conversation, it's also about how can we keep a few food production plants alive so that way we can get right into production at the beginning of the season. But we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into it. So, okay, we are going to pull up the questions because there's some good ones this week. And super fun to dive very deep, very quickly into the questions because most of them came in like 40 minutes ago. So just a reminder that the earlier you post your questions, the more time I have to ponder them, and the better my answers are. So let us jump into Bjorn's question. I don't think Bjorn's here yet. Nope. So Bjorn, my site was once a forest a long time ago, maybe hundreds of years. The nearest forest is uphill 800 meters away. How far back in time are we supposed to look to determine the original or prevailing ecosystem, pre-human disturbance? So generally, for our intents and purposes, we are looking for the blueprint that if humans stepped away, what would reestablish? So we're not looking at before the Little Wisconsin Ice Age. We're looking at this epoch, this warming period, which generally gives us what the plant dynamics in terms of the flora and the fauna are. So this epoch, let's call it, or this warming period. So if humans were here, what plants would reestablish? And that then, if we want to get to the nitty-gritty, gets into naturalization. So what plants are now there that were moved by animals, including humans, and what then would be used? Because this is the great thing about soil and the genetic seed bank in the soil. The soil will use whatever seeds it has to express itself and usually to cover itself very quickly. So you get a lot of people frustrated because of that, because they have an emotional attachment to what a place should be as opposed to what it is naturalizing into. So I think that answers that one. My site is agricultural. How do we consider site goals in determining ecological success and stage? The site owners want to diversify the plant species found, introduce shrubs and hedges, but the majority will keep its grassland. So my answer was, I need more information to answer this because how do we consider site goals and determine ecological succession is, again, we've got those three circles, overlapping circles: client needs and desires, we have intrinsic characteristics, and then we have regulatory frameworks. So there's the intrinsic characteristics of what the site would become if you just left it there, and then there's what the client wants. So if the client is interested in either hedgerow systems, straight up production, so a linear row line, if they're interested in alley cropping, or if they're interested in polycultures, be they food forest, be they silviculture, be they single guilds, then that informs how we might work with it succession. So if we've got a shrub system, let's say, and we know that ribes grows really great there, we know that the ribes family, and if we choose a production cultivar, then we know we're going to have some similarity between both what the site naturally wants to do and what the human wants to do, which is usually put into production. So we normally match it up that way. Similarly, if we know that if we left the site, it would move towards nut trees or juglones, then we know we could probably plant walnuts, and we could have some site-specific choice edible cultivars that would work that way. So yeah, that's how I would answer it without having more information. What's your best source of worldwide plant directory? So I start and end usually with the Natural Capital Plant Database. It was created by Paula Westmoreland and Daniel Housley. Great, $25 a year, well worth the time and money invested, mostly because of their association. So they have a plant association, or how plants interact with each other, and it's still growing. And because Dan Housley also created United Designers, which is international, he now has designers internationally that are using it, and so it's growing at that international level. Plants for a Future is also a great one. Plants for a Future, which is great. And then basically my approach is, and we'll get into this a bit because Sydney asked a great question about how I design, so we can go into that, is once I have my design layout, after I've either gone from what I normally do or from research, then I reach out to a local expert and I say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And I actually did this back in Calgary, because I didn't, although I was born in Calgary, I was not into this type of work when I was living in Calgary. I got into it on the west coast of Canada. So when I had an opportunity to design for my dad a couple of years ago, which most of you know because he's the example in all of the templates, and I should do an update because he's put in a lot of stuff, which is great. I actually reached out to a local designer, said, hey, could we trade time, or can I pay you outright to look over this and let me know what you think? And he did. And I learned a huge amount. This is why, for me, at the end of every design, even in sites I know, so I know the Pacific Northwest quite well, but I still pay another designer to look over my work. And I give them the red marker and I say, go to town, tell me why I'm wrong. And it's been the best choice I've made to advance as a designer, because somebody else, if you actually give them carte blanche to go at it, they'll tell you. And I've had some great opportunities there. So yeah, that would be the end of Bjorn's questions. Linda, who's also not on. So Linda had a question about, according to the NRCS site, it's mixed oak hardwood conifer forest. There's no predominant species. I was able to find a site that has info on ecological succession. Wanted to make sure I was heading in the right direction. There's a section on ecological succession with a model that I don't understand. And because I am not educated in this, I also don't understand. I think I understand the process, but the link she gave me doesn't go to this, so I can't go into the view interactive models. So basically my understanding of this, and this is because I've seen these once before and I'm dredging up memories, is basically how these different types of ecosystems move from state to state to state. So it's one of the reasons why they have this back and forth, and why meadow goes one way, because generally you have disturbance, you go back to meadow, and then you go to brush before you go to closed canopy forest, but you can always move up and down. So I believe that's what this means and says. However, in looking at this, I realized that we kind of skipped the step that talks about the ecoregion. So the nice thing is if you're in North America, the entirety of North America has been classified into different ecoregions. So the nice thing about this is we have a fair amount of possibility to actually jump in and take a look at these different ecoregions. So you can do it by North America, you can do by continental United States, and all the way down. If you're really keen, like I am, you can go into the states, and I believe the provinces are in here as well. And you can basically go into the data, which is what I did. So I went into PA. Where is it again? Pennsylvania. I never thought as a Canadian I would know all of the abbreviations for all of the American states. Never in my life. And then we would take the zip file, which is what I did. And then I opened the zip file, and then I went on to a shape SHP to KMZ converter online. I just picked the first one, converted it into a KMZ file. And then what I did is I brought it into Google Earth Pro, one of my favorite applications. And what I will show you now is Google Earth Pro, so that way you can see it. Okay, and okay, yeah, it's up. And so basically what I did is I brought this file in here, and this file came up in the red. So this is the state of Pennsylvania, and this is all of the different ecoregions. And then basically I clicked, I put in Linda's Latin long, which gave me the region we're in. And then I clicked on the region, and at the top, which is the lowest or the smallest discrete unit of the ecoregion, is the Redding prong. And so then I backed out of that, and then I went back into, where were we? Safari? Yeah. So then I went and started going into a deep dive into the northeastern highlands, because when I clicked on the Redding prong, this is a great site. I didn't know this site existed for the Atlantic states, but it talks about the Redding or Reading prong, and generally the forest. And then it had a plant list, but at this level it doesn't. So it says move up to the northeastern highlands, which I did. And then I went down to plant list. And so list native plants, and there's 1,540 plants found of this bioregion. So that would be the process that I would take for pretty much anybody. And then through these, you can basically, like, milk vetches are pioneers. Most of your milkweeds are going to be pioneers. A lot of your sages are going to be pioneers in riparian areas. Bindweeds are going to be pioneers. It doesn't matter where you are the world over. Sedges, again, lots of great sedges, lots of riparians. So I think these are in 500 increments. So basically, I went down here, starting to look as you get into the smaller thicket or the shrub to small tree. Our dogwoods are going to be pioneers. Our alders are going to be pioneers. Our willows. One of the reasons why you can live stake these trees, the dogwoods, the willows, and alders, you can cut a branch, make a hole with a piece of rebar, put the same size stick in the ground during rainy season, and it'll completely grow out, which is another great value as a technique if you're ever trying to revegetate slopes or increase the slope protection. David Polster did some great work about that, and I talk about Dave right at the beginning of our questions and answers underneath books. And Living on the Edge, David Polster, that's his wife. If you ever want to buy the book, highly recommend his books. They're brilliant. So anyways, that's what I did to then find the pioneer species and also find those other species. So just to give everyone a sense of, if you're in North America, this is a great way to go about it. Start with ecological regions, as we did before. You can look at the maps if you want, or if you're in the state or the province, you can then just download the content for that, or you can even go into the level, because level 3 is for the entire, but you can go into great maps. So if you're good at reading out these maps to get your spot, great. Most of us aren't. So then you have two options. You can either go for a clickable state, or you can do what I did, which is get the shape file and then download that shape file, go back onto the internet, look up shape to KMZ, convert, then bring into Google Earth Pro, and then you've got that ecoregion. And I basically do that for all my clients. So recently, I was just finishing up with a client in the Pacific Northwest. I'll show this to you folks. And in their file folder that I gave them, which actually speaks to Sydney's question, about my design process, which we can get into. I'm happy to jump about that. As we get into ecosystems and then ecoregions, there we go. And then I'm going to switch my share back to the old Google Earth Pro. So this is a client over in Pacific Northwest. And basically, once I turn on this marker, then I can find exactly the region. So we know that we're in the Willapa Hills, in the coastal range, in the maritime West Coast Forest, maritime West Coast Forest, and then the marine West Coast Forest. So that then gives me the information I need to then further research. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, seeing nodding. Great. Stupendous. Okay. Now, so that answers that question. This is about the time that those people show up. I don't know if anyone's ever noticed this, but the moment I finish answering the question, everybody shows up. Ah, there's Bjorn. What did I say? Of course. Hey, Bjorn, good to see you.
All right. Good evening.
All right, Sydney. Sydney's got a great question. So we're going to jump back in there. So Sydney's question was, hey, Java, not course specific, but I'm curious to know more about your favorite tools for designing sites. Obviously, Google Slides is great because it's easily accessible, but do you use other tools and how do you use them together typically? Okay, great. Let's talk about it. So I do not use Google Slides, but I would if I ever had to give a portfolio. So if I ever needed to give a client, usually clients that are working in groups or committees, and they need to show something to the rest of the group, I would go back to it. I used to design everything from scratch in an Illustrator type program, but now that I've got the template and it's been very well refined, I probably use that. So let's talk a little bit about how I use Google Earth Pro and why. So one of the things that I encountered early on in my process was the Agrarians platform created by Darren Doherty and his lovely wife, Lisa, and now a great number of exceptional designers. And the nice thing about the Agrarians platform is that it's based upon the Keyline Scale of Permanence for All Things Agricultural created by P.A. Yeomans, who wrote some fantastic books. Water for Every Farm is a wonderful book. It's probably the easiest to read of his. There's something about sort of early 20th century that made writing a little difficult to follow, and men in particular tried to be more verbose than was necessary. So it can be a little bit of a slog, but the Agrarians have created an incredible platform if you're looking at large scale design. If you're looking at urban sites, it's not going to be as useful, but if you like large scale design, farm design, it would be the next logical course for most of you. Darren runs a Rex, which is the online version of the Agrarians course, I think once a year. He used to do it twice, but they also have a workplace, which is fantastic. It's a great space if you're into or wanting to become a full-time designer. And he also has the Agrarians Handbook. So the Agrarians Handbook is the sort of seminal conversation that's coming in from agrarians.org. Seminal conversation that's coming in from Darren, Andrew Jeeves, who illustrated the Permaculture Designers Manual, and then he's got a couple of others that are working in there as well, Georgy Pavlov. And I can't recommend this book enough. If you're looking at higher scale design, if you're looking at more detailed design, this is a wonderful book. So if you go to the agrarians.org, go to the handbook. Brilliant. And I think at this point, they're somewhere around forestry or building, and they're completing the last few chapters. No, buildings. Yeah, there we go. So fencing, soil, economy, and energy are still in the work. So highly recommend that as a book if you're looking at detailed design. And if we ever get a question about Keyline, I will pull out that book to explain Keyline because it's that good. So back to Google Earth Pro. So one of the things that Agrarians does is they have a Agrarians platform, Google Earth template, and in it, he used the Keyline Scale of Permanence from 1 through 10, which is climate, geography, water, access, ecosystems, buildings, fencing, soil, economy, and energy. And I like the keyline scale of permanence for all things agriculture, or the agrarians platform as it's been reformed, because it's like a rolling toolbox. It's kind of like the mechanics toolbox. Sven Fall, who works for the Sven Institute, we just had a chat the other day, and that's what he calls it, and I love that. It makes so much sense. So I then usually put an upper location thing here, because I usually like to have and turn on the place marker or the property boundary right off the bat. And I don't like it being, I think Darren had it buried in geography, so I pulled it out. Second is climate. So the climate of the mind. So generally when I work with clients that are large scale, we do what's called a values-based decision-making process. So that way I can get a holistic context from them, which is their set of values they want to be true about this site. They're not decisions, we will have chickens. They are, we know where our food comes from and it's easy to manage. So that way we have a value that we can then proof should we get chickens. And then if chickens pass, then we can proof, should we get black Australorbs? Should we get Rhode Island Reds? Because all of those decisions have to be underneath a structure to figure out. So that's where I put that. Or if the clients decline, which these clients did, then we just do the must-haves and nice-to-haves. So they're nice just to be able to pull up. And then climate, meteorology. So we've got a climate table of tables around the world. We've got our Pope and Geiger classification that comes in as a Google element. I then go and find the different weather stations and show their distance, so I know how far they are, which gives them relevance. We usually get wind data, and I like pulling in the images so that way we can look at the wind data right beside the site. So that way it's right there. And then if you're working with a agrarian checklist, then there's a checklist that goes to a Google Doc. And this is another nice thing I like about Google Earth Pro is I can link to docs and I can pull them up. So that's there as well. Regulatory frameworks, because we all live in a regulatory climate. So if there's any major documents, I'll put them in here as well. Geography. So we've got a couple of big, tall conversations here. So we have cartography. So one of the things you may find as you get deeper into design, and if you go to the level of design I do, which is not above permaculture, but it's much more involved. I do a very deep dive into the work I do. So one of the things I'll do is I will find highly detailed topographical information, usually within 10 centimeters of resolution. Sometimes that's going out and taking that data myself. Sometimes that's buying data. In this situation, I believe the gentleman I was working with had the ability to, he already had the data. And so from there, we get actually a number of really great maps. So one of the maps we'll get is an aspect map, which is basically like the roof. It's like if you had a roof, what are all the directions the roof is facing? So once we turn on location and we get a sense of it. So now we get a sense of the majority of this property is mostly westerly or northerly. Very little of it goes south, and south up here you can see is sort of a turquoise, very little turquoise in this. Super useful for starting to plan. Then we'll have contours. This is, I think, both the metric and the imperial. So if we turn on, let's turn off the metric. Then we've got the imperial, and if we turn off the 1 foot, then we get contours we can use. And then hill shade is great for clients because most clients do not read contours. So it's useful to have a hill shade of what it looks like. And sometimes there's artifacting, which is when we have either things that shouldn't be there or things that should be there that aren't. So this is the latter of the two, but this is easier for clients to read. You can kind of see the road, you can kind of see the internal roads a little bit, and you can see these uppers as well. A reason I like using Google Earth Pro is because it's got the timeline feature, and sometimes, especially in continental US, you can go back in time and you can kind of take a look at what's been happening over this landscape. We actually caught the forestry on this landscape. I think it's between 2006 and 2009 or something like that, if I remember correctly. Yeah, 2006 and 2009. So somewhere in there, we started to have this first forestry situation. And then over time, you got to see where the reforestation took place and just how much of that landscape was still kept. This also informed what we and how we designed this property, because there are pre-existing trails there. That's super useful. That's cartography. Keyline is when we start. Keyline design is a whole structure of farm design. It's not just keyline plowing, and it starts off by marking off the primary ridges and valleys, and then it goes into land units. And you can think of land units as roof faces. So we get a sense of what the total potential budget is of that watershed, and then we can use it to make decisions. Land analysis, these were land capacities. So we had our slope map. This is done in both percentage and degree. And then also there's a specific agrarian's slope map for cultivation, which I like using because it shows what should be cultivated and not. And then we have land capabilities and what their capabilities are. And then site analysis. So we've got a zone analysis. So same thing as you folks know how to do. So we've got our zone. So if we click on that, it's going to pop up as zone 5. If we click up on this, it's going to, that should be zone 4. I think it's because I overlaid them. So I can turn them off and on. So I could turn off 5 and we would see 4. There we go. And then we had our projected zones after design was done. So I'm going to turn off 5 again. So these are our projected zones for process and design. Then we had our sector analysis, which you folks will remember. So I threw on the compass there. I usually turn it off when I'm looking at it myself, but I left it for the clients. And again, Sydney, this is why I do it this way, so I can give the clients this digital resource and they can work with it. Because my main goal is to be as redundant as possible, as quick as possible when I'm working and working with clients. Monitoring, so that was that. Pinpoints are great. We talked about this a few times. So if you're working in, that's interesting. It's not showing up. Oh, I know why. So I turned that off. So if you're working in iOS, then you want GPS Kit is the application. When I bought it years ago, it was 13 bucks. I'm sure it's doubled by now or more. And then if you're working in Android, you want Gaia GPS. And I think that's what these gents did. They used Gaia GPS to show and take photos, and then we were able to bring them in to Google Earth Pro. And that's why I like it, because they can take photo points and we can take that as we go along. Places of interest, didn't have anything specific to this site. So that's geography. Water, hydrology, this goes into our watersheds, and you have to pull way out before you find that first watershed. And that was the end of that one. And then control, there wasn't any drainage in that one. Sources, we did have close wells because we had to make some decisions about how they were going to get their wells. So I found the wells, I brought up the tag so I understood what their flow source was. Storages, so now we're getting into some design conversations. So these were some calculations in terms of what the catchment was for this one dam, and then its swale, and then the dam itself. And that design's still very much in flux because there's a bunch of other elements here. And then we had a septic conversation that came in during design. And then riparian, there's a riparian covenant that we cannot touch in this, so I put that in there as well. That is water. Now I'm missing something in water here, and I'm wondering where it went. I wonder if it's in here someplace. Old imagery, property, control, sources, well, storage. It's another map that's super useful that I'm not sure where I placed, somewhere in there. And then access, so road design kind of shows us what is and what could be. So going in there and just mapping those out. Ecosystem, so we just saw that. We saw the ecoregion of Washington, which gave us this. And then the clients then informed me of a couple of areas. So I made some notes, and then they found a chestnut, which they wanted me to put on there, so I did. And then we had just some, because there's a detail about this that we have to be conscientious about in terms of how much is disturbed and how much is undisturbed. I just had to make some measurements there. And then this really gets into design. So this is the shelter belts. This is the annual gardens and the staging grounds. And this is basically the end of a feasibility study. This is a concept design that then gets handed back to them. And then the house site, and then fire management, specific to what I would do there, thin and raised canopy. Had a couple of animal yards. Yeah, so that was that one. And then design. So we had some design elements that they brought in. Fencing was brought in. Soils had some classifications, which is good to bring in as well. And then they required nothing from me for economy or for energy, but I did put in their energy pathways because there was some decision making. So that's the long and the short of it in terms of design and within Google Earth Pro. And I like it because it's easy to use. It doesn't have layers, which again is frustrating, but I can hand it off to the client and they can use it, which is great. And if I was using QGIS or ArcGIS, it would be problematic to do that. I'm going to check the chat because I've been talking for a while, and I imagine there's going to be some conversations here. Do you then share this Google Earth file with them? Yes. So I tend to, great question, Deanna. I basically have a deliverables presentation where I record it, I present what I'm looking at. I usually do a how-to recorded video about the file set as well, so that way they can go back to it. Did the client wants link to an outside doc? Sorry, Jane, I'm not sure what you're
Like the first thing you showed, I think, was sort of like the wish list or like the things the client wanted on the site.
Yeah.
I was just curious like how that was incorporated into Google Earth.
Oh yeah. So that actually was a Google Doc that
Okay.
I had linked, and then I actively just put it into the file. So if we go back to client climate and must-haves. Yeah, oh, actually it was. Yeah, I left it as a Google Doc. And so what happens is when you click on it, it basically just brings up the Google Doc. Great question.
Okay.
Nice.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I do a presentation. I give them all of that, and then any other files that I have. So along with this, I have a very extensive feasibility study. This one was, I think, 160 pages long, and in it there's a full assay of their land and the digital assets, similar to what you guys are doing, but a bit more involved. And then recommendations. So recommendations can be as detailed as the structures they may want to think about using, but because it's a concept design, I'm still keeping it rather general, but a lot of clients, because of the detail I put into my concept design, will take that and run with it because they don't necessarily need me to go in and put in everything. And then after that, they kind of have two choices. They can either get a detailed design for me that they then hand over to another landscaper that or installer, builder that can put in, or as I'm more interested in doing these days is I'm finding somebody locally who I then vet or I know already. And basically I want to work with them so that way the client doesn't have to pay more for an even more detailed design. You know, if we can generally take a look at what the plants are available and things of that nature. One of the things that I think is problematic in most designers' conversation to new students is, you know, look at the natural capital plant database and then treat it like a wish list. Problem with that is you can wish anything you want, but if the nurseries around you don't have the plants you want, then it doesn't matter. So one of the things, as an answer to you, Bjorn, going back, we already covered your question, so you're gonna have to come back and watch it. But one of the questions was about plant databases, and I was waiting for this moment to answer the end of that, which is I will generally get a sense of, especially if I don't know the place, of, you know, what are the plants there from a digital standpoint. But pretty quickly, if I'm getting into detailed design, I'm going to start calling nurseries and I'm going to get plant lists so I know what I have to work with there. It's one of the biggest mistakes I see in new designers. They look at a natural capital plant database or they buy a book, and a lot of those bucks are pie in the sky in terms of the plants. You need to go with what's around you and go with the hits, really. One of the things that people get excited about in permaculture is this out of zoneitis feeling where I can grow anything. Problem is that some of those plants that push the edges of either the heat or the coolness of the site, they're going to be a lot of work. So generally we want to populate our site with like 99% of the hits and then a 1% experiment. Clients will thank you because there'll be early successes and they'll know that those successes are going. So basically at that point, I then have both my feasibility study, which is a document, a Google Earth done in hierarchy. So that way I can I can go to each section, and I can also allow contractors to come in because I'll usually employ an editor to go through and make sure I don't sound like a monkey, because my writing can be problematic. Even if Grammarly touches it, it can still be problematic. And then as we get into the end of it, sometimes I will do a conceptual design rendered via Morpholio Trace, and most times not, because it's a lot of work and all of the detail is already there in that design. So sometimes if a client's like, no, I want like a general representation, great. I'll quote him whatever the hourly is, and then I'll go to and I get to draw for, I love when people pay me to draw. It's great. But basically I came up with this process so that way people didn't have to pay me to draw, because there's a lot of effort to put into design. And I'll say that this process was very much informed by Neil Bertrando, who's another instructor in this course, who designs purely through PowerPoint. One of the most brilliant designers, designs on PowerPoint because he doesn't believe that people should pay for a pretty picture. They should pay for a functional design. And so that's why so much of the template is circles and lines, because we don't need a highly rendered conversation. If that's what you do and you like doing renders and perspective renders and all the rest of it, there's some great courses I can recommend, but generally that's the process. Sydney, any clarifying questions on that rather long-winded answer? No. Okay. Any follow-up questions from anybody about that process? Feel free just to.
I'm curious because I know that's like a large scale kind of design system. If you were to do more of an urban, smaller site, what kind of design process would that look like for
So
you?
I would still use Google Earth Pro only because I can put so much information in there visually that's easy to reference. But once we got down to the design, because most of my urban designs are produced, they go to detailed design. There's usually not a conceptual phase. I would and have and did, because you guys have seen the tutorials, use Google Slides because it's simple and easy. That said, I love drawing. I really like drawing. And so the majority of my design work is done via Morpholio Trace and an iPad Pro 11-inch from 2018 because it's fun. And years ago, I had two values that slowly crept into my work that took a long time to get there. One was, this has to be enjoyable and it has to be easy. And they used to be backwards. I used to use it as it should be easy first and then enjoyable, and I ended up with a lot of easy things that were frustrating. So basically that became the way that I design for small scale. And I like doing perspective renders live with clients, where I'll take the iPad, I'll take a photo of what I'm looking at, and I might be able to find this actually. I'll take a photo of what I'm looking at and I'll start to draw with them in scale, which is super fun. Because if you're using something like Morpholio Trace, you can set the vanishing points. And if you're taking a photo of the house itself will have its vanishing points, so you can set them. And then everything is really easy to outline and draw and do all of those things. So that's why I do it. But I started with 8.5 by 11 printed base maps, brought transparency paper with me, and did everything via transparency. And then a colleague of mine started working in 3 foot by 2 foot base maps with a clipboard that was this big that you could barely hold underneath your arm and bring on site. It was fun because it was big and people could, look at it, look around it. And, generally if I was still doing things in person on site, I probably would do something similar. But then I moved down to 11 by 17, only because the printability was easier. You could always find somebody printing 11 by 17. You could always find the paper for it. And then another colleague of mine started doing it full time, and he just bought an 11 by 17 scanner and printer. So that way the whole design suite was in his office. So he could scan the transparencies, he could digitize them, he could put them in, and he could work them again. Great question. Remember when you sorted everything and you don't know where everything is anymore? Yeah, that definitely happened. Plan design misc. Maybe that was it. Oh, this kind of works. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll show this one. So this was a friend of my brother's who I met a couple of times. Found out what I did. Found out I was in town in Calgary, and basically decided that they wanted to They wanted me to come over and do a consultation about greenhouses. They just wanted to pay for my time. They just wanted ideas, which is the best because you basically just get to go and play, which is super fun. And yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this. Share this. Copy the link for the Zoom. Send it to myself that I can access on iPad. Wait a second or two, because it's going to space. We all have to remember. And then I'm actually going to send this to myself via email as well, because it's taken a moment. I used to always sign in with my iPad, but after 4 or 5 that you don't use it, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to always have it in there. Okay, so you bring this up. Okay, turn off the video. Nobody needs to look at my nostrils. Okay, no audio. Okay, I'm going to share content, screen, start broadcast. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so there we go. Okay. That looks good. So now we're going to go to, all right. So this is Morpholio Trace. And basically, when I came on site, I took a photo. The wife was there. The husband was late picking up their kid. So he had relayed to her generally what they were thinking. And we ended up, I'll do a new layer here so we can talk about it. They ended up throwing these little bricks. That's way too thick. Let's redo that, shall we? They ended up putting these little bricks so we could be clear on where it might be. And then I was able to go in and start to show what this would look like. So I showed them the frame, generally where it would sit, showed them the plastic, how it would fit on with the channel lock, showed them generally what pass-through and access would look like, showed them what internal structure. So they really want to do tomatoes, so we showed them some string structures, and we were able to show them that in real time. We also then, there we go, they wanted to renovate some grow boxes. They wanted to renovate some of these garden beds. And one of the things that was pretty clear is that because they're just west of Calgary, very near Kananaskis country and very much in a wild area, that we needed to build some beds that were a little bit more robust. So we ended up doing a keyhole design that then had fencing around it. And also had basically a Hugelkultur laid within it that then took the downspout over on the edge. And then the downspout basically came in and went through a perforated pipe. And that perforated pipe was lower, and then it was higher out here. So that way we had an overflow. And then what was this last bit about? Oh, that was the original design if they wanted to keep it tight, but they wanted the space. So that's what I like about Morpholio Trace, is that I have the ability to make those drawings in real time. Yeah. Any questions about that or thoughts about that?
I have a question. I'm just, I guess, more generally curious about like other courses. Like I have just been like a hobby gardener myself. So Permaculture Design Certification is sort of the first course I've taken. I'm curious, like if I wanted to improve my like drawing skills or like my general design skills, like should I take like a general like landscape design course, or like how would you recommend going about that?
Yeah, so it all depends on what the skill is you're trying to improve upon. So if as a designer, you're wanting to round out, let's say, your food production conversation, and you want to know, well, how do I calculate how much food for a client? So we go from what they eat and what they're creating and all the rest of it. So we created a family food security course that has a calculator in it in regenerative living that would develop that for you. You would be able to take that and work with that and create it. Jamie Wallace is an award-winning landscape designer, who I convinced finally to do a design course on aesthetic design, because most of our designs end up being very functional and his are beautiful. And so he started as an ornamental designer, doing beautiful hardscapes, doing, multi-$100,000 jobs, and then got into regenerative design about 10 years ago. So he's got a course coming up that we're starting in a week on Thursday. But if you can't make it and you don't want to double up on your courses, which I totally get, the self-paced version will be available after that. So there's an opportunity there. And that's what I've been doing with regenerative living. I'm basically developing advanced design courses for everybody. So we've got a hedgerow course up there, an erosion course up there. I'm just proofing. There's a landscape designer and instructor out of the University of California who did a Morpholio Trace course, and I'm just going through it now to see if I recommend it. I would say so far it's quite good in terms of learning the process and the conversation. But outside of a tool-specific process, Gaia College has a landscape design course, which some colleagues of mine took. When I saw the content, I wasn't as impressed, only because if you're willing to muck about with a program like Morpholio Trace, that's basically half the battle done, because you need to be able to take a look at things, understand flow, understand negative space. And actually, we're going to talk about that a lot in Jamie's course. So that may actually be the course that would be most useful for you. And then I'm looking at doing a cohort for a year of design mentorship for probably a small group. We're looking at starting maybe March or April. So if you're interested in that, feel free to put your name down on the email list for All Points Design, and we'll let you know when and if I decide to do it. Okay, we've got some
Okay,
chat.
great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, and then where can we access the course that's starting with James? Where can I find information about that?
Yeah, let me just pull it up right now. So, Regenerative Living Online. And then so this is the link. And then I'll quickly touch on it so that way folks get a chance to walk through it all together. So, basically the early bird price was supposed to change yesterday, but somebody didn't change it. That somebody's me. So if you want to hurry, yeah, I could hold off for 24 hours. Let's go through this. So basically, these are Jamie's landscapes, and I think right off the bat you can tell he knows what he's doing. He's done hardscapes, he's done softscapes, he knows regenerative landscaping, so he knows that process and that conversation. Somebody has way too many tabs open because they were doing research at the last minute for that question. So let's increase the RAM, shall we? This is really about folks who want to design and design well and design in terms of a sense of an aesthetic function. It's not specifically about how do I install a water feature? It's more, how do I think about a water feature and how do I place it so that way it has the most amount of aesthetic appeal for a site? So we're going to talk about the role of aesthetics within our landscape, water, access, soil, the details of hard planning and hardscaping. Starts this Thursday, goes until March 7th. So there's 6 classes. One of the great things is because Jamie and I, both instructors with OSU, we designed this course so that way you can develop your own plans and then get feedback from Jamie at the end of the course. You'll have access to the course content for life. And is there anything else there? Just some of his great work, and then some testimonials from other folks. So yeah, so that's the course. Any questions about that? No. Okay, cool. So no, Jamie's course isn't through OSU, it's through Regenerative Living, which is my e-learning platform. So if I was to start again, if I was going to start again, if I was doing urban design, I would take a PDC. I would then probably take, depending on what kind of work you wanted to do, if you wanted to go into rainwater harvesting, we also just had a phenomenal course with Gord Baird of eco-sense.ca on regenerative living. And if you want to get into designing rainwater harvesting structures, it's fantastic. It's better than the ARCSA course, which is the official course for the North American Rainwater Body Association, which I took. And then decided I wanted Gord to teach a course for us. So I would probably take a course like that. If you're working in erosion, I would probably take the LTEC course, low tech erosion control course, also on regenerative living. What kind of course would I take that isn't through us? There's two soil courses that's going to be coming up. One is with Joe Tobias of Root Shoot Design, who's a phenom when it comes to living soils. So if you're keen to get into the microbiology of of soils, we're going to run that course again. We ran it a couple of years ago and she's improved dramatically. She's very much a prodigy of Elaine Ingham, but then she also added in a number of conversations and courses. So that would be a good one. And then there's going to be a course, sort of a complete soil primer with a man named John Weebly that's coming up, where we're going to dive into soil from all of its aspects, not just the way that permaculture looks at it, but starting with a scientific perspective, and then talking about the organics and all the rest of it. So that's a good one to take. I would learn a design software that you like to use. I wouldn't learn a design software that you think looks good, because if you're designing, you're going to be doing it a lot. So you have to love what you're doing. I tried Illustrator. I tried Infinity. Infinity is an Adobe knockoff. So instead of paying whatever ridiculous fees Adobe is every year, Infinity is a one-time, and they usually do sales around the major sales per year. So they do, like, basically if it's a holiday, they'll give you 50% off a one-time fee. So I really like Affinity for that reason, but I don't like moving pixels around on the page. Doesn't excite me. I'd rather draw. So that's why I invested in a tablet. I tried using the bigger tablet, the 12.9. It's too big. I didn't like taking it on site. I didn't pull it out as much. I also bought the mini because I'm that guy who has to try them all. And I like it for consuming media and whatnot, but it's just not big enough. So I ended up going with this 11 and really like it. Yeah, it's been a great little design tool. I would go with the 2nd gen pencil. 1st gen pencil was a frustration beyond anything else. And do I recommend a Android device? No, because I've never used them. So I've only used Apple devices when it comes to graphic tablets, and my main laptop is Apple. So that's why I went with this device, but the latency with the pencils for the Android devices are now on par with Apple. Problem is that some of the softwares don't cross. So I don't think Morpholio traces on Android or is Procreate, which is what I originally used. What's the difference between Affinity and Morpholio Trace? Yeah, so Affinity is a designer knockoff. It's basically a Adobe, or pardon me, Illustrator. Hold on, let's do some research so I'm not saying lies. Okay, so now they've got a full suite. Interesting. Okay, so Affinity has basically been going through. Oh, so they've created a designer, a photo, and a publisher. Interesting. Okay, so basically they're doing exactly what they said they were going to do after they made the designer, and yeah, so $20. There you go. Purchase the Mac for a one-time payment of $70, or the whole suite for $165, and you can buy the iPad version for $18. That's cool. So the difference is Affinity is a non-stylus focused graphical design application, and Morpholio is specific to architecture. So there's a number of functions, and I could bring this back up if we wanted to. I could pull up a project. There's a couple of functions here in Morpholio that are very specific to landscape design or architecture. It's specifically for architecture, but landscape designers are using them. And one of those functions is if I bring in terrain from, they use I think Apple Maps, which is not as robust usually as Google, but I can scale it immediately. So I can put a scale on it, so everything's scaled. If I ever need to create templates and transparencies and things like that, it has stencils actively that I can use. So let me do the share again. Should almost just do a whole Zoom hour on Morpholio. Oh, did I? Oh, I looked. I got out of this. Interesting. Let's try again. So let's not do nostril cam. Share screen. Start used. Okay, so let's show the honey. So this is a First Nation project. We're basically trying to feed 60 elders plus the rest of the band more and more every year. And so this helps us get rough dimensions and rough conversations. So basically what happened is oh, I'm turning things on. That comes off, that comes off, that comes off. Okay, cool. So basically once I had this drone image that they had, and then they told me what the measurements were for one of these cedar, that's way too big. One of these cedar logs, I could basically then take my scale and I could set scale immediately on this project. So I could set scale and then I could come here and I could put scale here, put scale here, type it in what it is, and then my whole thing is scaled. So you can see down here in the bottom, down here, this scale bar is accurate. So I can draw now in scale, which is huge when you have to design and bring something in. But again, the reason I did this is because I like drawing. I don't particularly want to be moving a bunch of pixels around on the screen. So over this conversation, I was able to create a number of specific design conversations for the client, send it to them, get on Zoom with them, go back and forth and basically design these hugelkulturs and the row crops. And I'll be coming back to this project in a couple of months or maybe weeks because we're designing the full plant out coming up here. So that's why I like Morfolio. That's my love letter in short form.
John, is there like so my computer has a touch screen and I bought like a stylus off Amazon and I can't get the stylus to really like draw a straight line without skipping all the time. Is there
Okay.
is there like is it like flawless on an iPad with a proper
Flawless.
stylus, or do you always
Flawless.
it's flawless? Okay, it really acts like
Flawless.
paper.
Flawless.
Okay.
Yeah, I was amazed when I bought one and it was flawless. It's every single time I touched the stylus to the screen, it was flawless. I added a screen protector, it was still flawless.
Okay.
So that's why I've
Switch
got one, because I just need something that works all the time.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Any other follow-up questions?
I do have a follow-up question, John.
Yeah.
On the ecology and the plant directories. Very good call on first reaching out to the nurseries. That's a smart one. I was wondering what your experience is with harvesting from the wild. So seeds, cuttings, saplings. Obviously, a lot of time goes into it. But apart from that, what's your experience, your take on it?
Great question. So when it comes to harvesting from local areas, I harvest two, sometimes three main categories. First is soil. So generally, if I'm developing compost for a site, I will pull the O horizon, which is you take off the leaves and everything on top, and then you grab the very fertile soil that's underneath, and then I will add that to my compost, or I'll add that to my hugelkulturs or my bed. Basically, the soil food web established in a forest is far more advanced from a fungal to bacterial ratio than disturbed ground. Disturbed ground can be very bacterially focused. So I want to move it towards fungally dominated as quickly as possible. And that's what that does. Because if you're taking from a forest, it's fungally dominated. If you pull it out, you see that all these little white strands, those are hyphae, which are single strands of the full network, which is called mycelium, which is fungal bodies. The bodies we see, the mushrooms, the conch fungus, those are usually reproductive bodies that come off of the fungi. So I will harvest that quite a bit. Second thing I'll harvest is in the plant spectrum, and more I'll harvest water plants, so riparian plants from local ponds and bring them into the ponds that I have. So things like duckweed, you know, if you're growing chicken or ducks, there's no reason why you shouldn't be actively cultivating duckweed in your ponds to then feed them. You can cut your feed cost by about 30 to 40%. Cattails, sedges, rushes, some grasses. So I will actively transplant that. There was a situation that was remarkable years ago that I loved the simplicity of it. So I went to Austria. I went and learned from Sepp Holzer in his second farm. So it wasn't the Kramatterhof. It's what's called the Holzerhof. It's in the south of Austria near Italy. And what he had done is he had noticed that there was already some pre-existing nut trees, but he developed terraces, and then he used those areas to basically stall the nuts from the nut trees when they fell, and use it as a nursery, a no-touch nursery. So that way the trees would fall and he would go and harvest, and then he would repopulate the rest of the property. And so I've used that principle probably in every design I've done. I've designed areas where there's going to be a lot of plants that I want to successionally create, and then I will use that as a nursery. So I do this also with red osier, dogwood, alder, and willow. I don't know if you were here for the conversation, but all those plants will take with what's called live staking, which is basically you cut them, and during the rainy season, you dig a hole with a piece of rebar, you put in a branch of that material, and that will resprout. Or, as we did in a hilarious job, we needed to create a privacy screen that the client didn't have to manage. And so we took, I believe it was an alder. Yeah, I think it was an alder that was like 30 feet tall, cut it down, dug a trench that was 30 feet long, stuck the tree in horizontally, lifted up the branch, put a rock in the crux of the branch armpit, if you will, buried it, and we had an instantaneous hedge. It was immediately a hedge. And we placed it beneath the power line, which meant that BC Hydro had to manage it, not us. So BC Hydro had to come by and had to shear the top and then make it go bushy, which was lovely. So, you know, those types of processes are pretty easy to understand and do. A lot of your native pollinators, a lot of your native mulch makers, I'll take directly from the forest, usually taking 10%. So when we wild harvest, it's a 10% or less conversation. And you know, don't get excited about it. Don't get obsessed about it. But if you're looking at the forest and you take out a couple plants and you can't notice it, you're probably doing good. If you look at the forest and it's like, okay, I've clear cut the forest, you're not. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. You have to be intelligent about it, but not so rigid. But yeah, those are the two main. And then in rare occasions, we will harvest animal, specifically from the forest or from ecosystems, things like fish, crawfish, some types of ants we want in some ecosystems. I had a friend of mine, a colleague, who created a termite cracker, and he would actively relocate the queen and the termites into the chicken coop, build a fence around the termites, put it was a wild thing. It was a frame that had a mesh on it and also had two connection points for a car jack. And basically he would allow the termite population to build, and then he would crack the nest so that way the chickens could get fresh protein at it. And then he could just crack it back down, and then it would build up, and then they would come in. So yeah, there's some interesting situations where that becomes true. Good question. Thanks.
Thanks, Joan.
Okay, so Jane left, and she did have a question about artificial intelligence and permaculture, and it's a big question, and I've tackled this twice before, so I feel good tackling it, but I don't think we'll tackle it here. We'll tackle it in 2 weeks' time. But what I will do is I'll tackle Kevin's conversation because it's a good one, and we'll end there. So I'll probably go another 15. So if you have to run, go for it. It's been a pleasure to see everybody. But if you want to stay for some season extension, please do. So season extension is basically creating microclimates so that way either wind, rain, snow, or cold doesn't affect your plants to the point to where either they go into dormancy or they continue producing. So primary ways of season extension is finding the hot zones, the microclimates of your site, and planting your season extension crops there. So if you're looking for kale or greens that are going into the fall season, you place them on the south side of the house with as much radiant heat that's bouncing off the house. Plus, that house keeps that plot of land from trying to heat the universe, because this is what's always happening. Heat's always moving to cool regions. Heat's very generous. It always wants to move out. So generally what we're trying to do is reduce the amount of heat that's being lost to the universe. And one of the ways we can do that is with homes, right? So first, identify your microclimates. Second, identify the crops that you want to see through the winter. So primarily what we did, living in Canada, where we had like 100 some days of frost-free growing, is we would do what's called low poly tunnels, which are the cheapest and easiest thing to do. And basically what you have to do is you have to find a material that'll make a hoop. We generally were using plastic electrical conduit. Could be 1/2 inch, could be 3 inch, 3/4 of an inch. An inch is getting a little thick. So generally 1/2 inch. And because I had standardized beds, and this is where permaculture and we're not at odds, but if I'm creating a production landscape, I'm growing food. If I'm growing food, I'm going to grow all my carrots in a bed. I'm not going to have some carrots over here, some carrots over there. It's not going to be a hunt to find the carrots. And this is the difference between an ecological landscape that is kind of a mosaic, a scatter pattern of productive plants, and a landscape that still looks beautiful, but it's built for production. So my landscapes, when I'm doing food, it's production. If I can and will do, I'll create little enclaves of shrubs and pollinators so that way they look beautiful, but they're probably going to be a single specimen of probably 15 others that are in a line that have subspecies and are basically done in a polyculture. So all that to say, I use rows. I use a 30-inch bed only because I can straddle a 30-inch bed. So I can put 1 foot on one side, 1 foot on the other. And then I usually do a 6-inch pathway in between. So that way I can just get in. And then usually every 3 or 4 beds, I will then have a 2 or 3 foot wheelbarrow pathway. So that way the wheelbarrows are close. Or if the ends of the pathways are if the rows themselves are 25 or 50 feet, then the wheelbarrow can just go on that end row or that cross pathway, so that way I can get in. So at that point, I'm basically taking the material that I want, and I'm basically doing it in situ to see if I'm, like, say I'm doing a kale crop, I'm going to want at least 2 feet in there. And so I'm basically figuring out, well, how much material do I need that? Sure, we could do the math on it. We could just grab one, bend it. We need about that much, cut it, done. Then what I do is I take rebar, cut it about 18 inches, stick it in, and then I'm using the rebar as a hoop. So whatever the rebar is, it's got to be the OD has to be same size or less than the ID, the interior diameter of the electrical hoop, and then basically putting it on top. And then what I did is I ran a string or a rope, basically taking a rebar stake in the middle of the hoop, tying it, going to the first hoop, tying it, and then going all the way down. So I had a ridge line. So now I've got a hoop and I've got a ridge line that goes all the way down. Then I get whatever plastic I have, 3, 6 mil. 6 is kind of the go-to for most of this work. Cutting it so that way it drapes over and has a little bit to go into the pathway. And then I bought a bunch of clamps. So you can make clamps out of the piping itself. You either get the same size piping or the piping up, and you cut it in sections and then slice it down the middle. And you really have to sand the edges because if you don't, it'll rip the plastic, or you just buy clamps. And at some point, I just buy what I need. So that then gives you shelter. And it's really great for shelter in the summer as we're getting into heat domes, and shelter into the cool season. So generally I'm doing this for most crops that I'm worried about in the heat, because I can throw remay or shade cloth on top, and that basically cools it right down. And if I'm doing drip irrigation underneath, then it works as well. So what kind of crops would I do this with? I would do this with kale. I would do this with my root crops, specifically carrots. So I would basically seed all my carrots in May, June. And then before the first rains in the fall, I would then throw on my hoops and then make sure that no rain got on the soil where the carrots were. And then come February, I would take off a foot or two of snow, pull off my plastic, pull out my carrots that were perfect and beautiful because the soil never froze, and so they never froze. And I also used it as my root cellar. So that's an easy way to do that. Same thing with kale. Kale gets sweeter. Most plants are going to get sweeter when they freeze because they're resisting freezing. So they produce more antifreeze, which for them is sugar. So kale gets sweeter. Carrots get sweeter. Parsley gets sweeter. So you can keep a fair number of those long term. If you're in the real cold environment, they do this further north than I was in Canada. They would do a high tunnel, which is usually 8 feet tall, 12 feet wide, or variations of that. Basically the same idea, but instead of using that, you're using what's called chain link fencing. So if you've ever seen a chain link fence, they would use the top rail for the ribs, and then they would use the line posts as your ground posts, so that way they would fit into it. And if you take a look at the Bootstrap Farmer or Farmer's Friend, both of those are great sites. And basically, if you're like me, Kevin, you would look at those kits and go, I can probably buy this locally and just buy the jig. And so there's a bending jig that you buy for like 150 bucks, and you can make as many ribs as you like. And then you just have to buy the fasteners to put it together. And so the high tunnel or the low tunnel are the two major ways to have season extension. Other ways are increasing mulch. So if you're not wanting a plant to go too far, you basically can mulch deep, and that can resist, but generally with plastic like that. Would that work for when it gets to minus 50 like last week? It would if you did them both. So if you had a high tunnel and then you had a polytunnel within the high tunnel, that would still last through that time. The great thing about keeping things like root crops in the ground is the ground itself is resisting. You may lose all the greens on top, and that happens by the spring anyways, basically. But for things like kale, you had both of those and then probably threw a blanket on top of the low polytunnel, kale would still be good to go. Because basically you're just creating resistance to heat loss, which is usually air or air space. So the R value of it, you're basically creating a little volume of air and then a big volume of air and then the outside. Colleague and friend of mine, Curtis Stone, he really likes doing 2 layers of plastic and then inflating them. So basically he creates this, he puts strapping on the top, he has a little low electrical fan, and he's done remarkable things in that type of climate. I don't have the patience for that, and I don't particularly like a fan running 24/7. So I've never done that type of work. And then you can go all the way to the other end, which is like Jerome Ausentowski's climate battery 4-season greenhouses, where you're taking the hot air during the summer months, pushing them down into the ground that's insulated, and then that comes up in the winter. And that's where a lot of those tropical greenhouses in Montana and elsewhere do. Bjorn, I've seen a greenhouse with compost piles in each corner. Yeah, it can, for sure. There's lots of ways to heat up greenhouses. Jerome's way was having a sauna and a hot tub in his greenhouses, so that way if it got too cold, he could heat it up and work it. And then compost piles work really well if you know how to make good compost piles. We've done that a number of times. We've also created compost piles in the greenhouses and then had cottonwoods find those compost piles. And then come the spring, went to go put a pitchfork in it, and literally the pitchfork stopped in the square that was the compost pile because the cotton roots got up and totally ate the compost. So also be conscientious that when you make fertility, everything else comes in for that fertility as well. So, all right, folks, I'm getting to the end here. I don't think, oh, we got one more question. Linda, when will this meeting be available to watch the first 30 minutes? So usually I upload it immediately afterwards. So as long as it takes to upload, I say 48 hours, but usually within an hour or two, it's up on YouTube, ready to go. All right, folks, thanks for the fun time. It was great to see everybody. What's, before we leave, what's everybody taking away from the call today? What feels important or valuable?
I'd say there's just so many layers to this. The level of depth you go through, kind of just compared to, for example, I'm thinking of using this as like a community organizing tool, where it's like simplicity would be king. you know, like, I don't know. So and like just seeing everybody's experience too and doing the peer reviews, it's like everybody's having like a different tack to it. So anyway, it's so I'm taking away.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
What we just talked about and like being able to extend your season is great because Edmonton is so short. So I've been worried about that coming from Ontario where you have so much more time and warmth. So that's awesome. It's definitely giving us ideas. And I love to see like your process for how you plan things because I think that's fascinating, like just how different people do everything so differently. So it's just good to see those examples. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Eddie.
I really like how you made the recommendations for the next the next course that we could be doing, because I think sometimes we know this is a lot of work, but it's coming to an end and you kind of want to see. I was actually checking out the water, I don't know what it's like a rainwater course. I don't know if it's your course, and because I feel like, okay, I'm gonna plan this, but then I'm gonna need this information for what I'm doing. But it's helpful that I know what to look into.
Awesome. Thanks, Linda.
Yeah, I think jumping back to the very beginning, with the first question for the native plants relevant to the ecoregion was helpful. Just in terms of that site, the bplant.org. And then starting to think about like design processes with clients potential, seeing you're involved and what that would look like for me. So planting the seeds for that. So thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. And if you want to go back to it and talk about what a scaled down version of it looks like, it's a pretty common question with folks post PDC or at the end. You know, how do you use the Google slide template for clients if you're not a student and trying to educate me about your education? We could talk about that as well in one of the next ones.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Bjorn, did you want to chime in before we let go?
Yeah, I was just in line with Kevin's comment. Every time you show your magic, I'm both amazed and also a bit disappointed about the long way to go. But that was cool. It was a nice demo. And looking forward to rewatch the upload because I missed the first half hour.
Okay, sounds good. Well, one of the things that will be coming out is that interest list about doing a group mentorship conversation. So that is of interest to you. Definitely look for that email coming through Canvas because I've had more and more students ask about it. So I've been thinking that it just is moving up higher on the potential list of things. So
yeah, definitely interesting. And also, I also subscribe to the PINA summit that's happening in 2 weeks. Nice. So it could be nice for the rest as well.
Yeah, so the PINA summit, they hate being called PINA. They like being called PINA, but
all right, PINA.
I totally support calling them PINA just to watch them squirm. It's fun. Yeah, so that's coming up. Also, the Foodscaper Summit is coming up. So if you're looking at a design build company, I think that's the 24th. So it's 2 days away here. That's looking pretty good too. So yeah, there's some great courses coming up. Also, there's a great what to do after a PDC game plan called Cosmic Bob's Plan for Your Life. So if you want to look that up and go read about Cosmic Bob's Plan for Your Life, it was created by the Bullock brothers, and it's great. It's a fun one that really kind of hits on that hippie homesteader conversation. So if that's of any interest to you, that's there. Anyways, folks, fantastic to see everybody. Glad everybody was so interested and we had such a great conversation, and really looking forward to the rest of your information. If you're ready early, do submit early, because as we get into the design conversations, early submissions, you get more feedback. It's a nice iterative process. But yeah, if you want to say goodbye, now's the time, and see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
All right. See everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Javin.
Bye, everyone.